Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Please have a seat. What a singular honor it is for me to be here today. I want to thank, first and foremost, the Johnson family for giving us this opportunity and the graciousness with which Michelle and I have been received. We came down a little bit late because we were upstairs looking at some of the exhibits and some of the private offices that were used by President Johnson and Ms. Johnson. And Michelle was in particular interested of a recording in which Lady Bird is critiquing President Johnson's performance. And she said, come, you need to listen to this. And she pressed the button and nodded her head. Some things do not change, even 50 years later. To all the members of Congress, the warriors for justice, the elected officials, and community leaders who are here today, I want to thank you. 4 days into his sudden presidency, and the night before he would address a joint session of the Congress in which he once served, Lyndon Johnson sat around a table with his closest advisors, preparing his remarks to a shattered and grieving nation. He wanted to call on senators and representatives to pass a civil rights bill, the most sweeping since Reconstruction. And most of his staff counseled him against it. They said it was hopeless, that it would anger powerful Southern Democrats and committee chairmen, that it risked derailing the rest of his domestic agenda. And one particularly bold aide said he did not believe a president should spend his time and power on lost causes, however worthy they might be. To which it is said, President Johnson replied, well, what the hell's the presidency for? What the hell's the presidency for? If not to fight for causes you believe in. Today, as we commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, we honor the men and women who made it possible. Some of them are here today. We celebrate giants like John Lewis and Andrew Young and Julian Bond. We recall the countless unheralded Americans, black and white, students and scholars, preachers and housekeepers, whose names are etched not on monuments, but in the hearts of their loved ones and in the fabric of the country that they helped to change. But we also gather here, deep in the heart of the state that shaped him, to recall one giant man's remarkable efforts to make real the promise of our founding. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Those of us who've had the singular privilege to hold the office of the presidency know well that progress in this country can be hard and it can be slow, frustrating, and sometimes you're stymied. The office humbles you. You're reminded daily that in this great democracy, you are but a relay swimmer in the currents of history, bound by decisions made by those who came before, reliant on the efforts of those who will follow to fully vindicate your vision. But the presidency also affords a unique opportunity to bend those currents by shaping our laws and by shaping our debates, by working within the confines of the world as it is, but also by reimagining the world as it should be. This was President Johnson's genius. As a master of politics and the legislative process, he grasped, like few others, the power of government to bring about change. LBJ was nothing if not a realist. He was well aware that the law alone isn't enough to change hearts and minds. A full century after Lincoln's time, he said, "Until justice is blind to color, until education is unaware of race, until opportunity is unconcerned with the color of men's skins, emancipation will be a proclamation, but not a fact." He understood laws couldn't accomplish everything, but he also knew that only the law could anchor change and set hearts and minds on a different course. And a lot of Americans needed the law's most basic protections at that time. As Dr. King said at the time, it may be true that the law can't make a man love me, but it can keep him from lynching me. And I think that's pretty important. And passing laws was what LBJ knew how to do. No one knew politics, and no one loved legislating more than President Johnson. He was charming when he needed to be, ruthless when required. He could wear you down with logic and argument. He could horse trade, and he could flatter. "You come with me on this bill," he would reportedly tell a key Republican leader from my home state during the fight for the Civil Rights Bill, "and 200 years from now, school children will know only two names, Abraham Lincoln and Everett Dirksen." And he knew that senators would believe things like that. President Johnson liked power. He liked the feel of it, the wielding of it. But that hunger was harnessed and redeemed by a deeper understanding of the human condition, by a sympathy for the underdog, for the downtrodden, for the outcast. And it was a sympathy rooted in his own experience. As a young boy growing up in the Texas Hill Country, Johnson knew what being poor felt like. Poverty was so common, he would later say, we didn't even know it had a name. The family home didn't have electricity or indoor plumbing. Everybody worked hard, including the children. President Johnson had known the metallic taste of hunger, the feel of a mother's calloused hands, rubbed raw from washing and cleaning and holding the household together. His cousin Ava remembered sweltering days spent on her hands and knees in the cotton fields with Lyndon whispering beside her, "Boy, there's got to be a better way to make a living than this. There's got to be a better way." It wasn't until years later, when he was teaching at a so-called Mexican school in a tiny town in Texas, that he came to understand how much worse the persistent pain of poverty could be for other races in a Jim Crow South. Oftentimes, his students would show up to class hungry. And when he'd visit their homes, he'd meet fathers who were paid slave wages by the farmers they worked for. Those children were taught, he would later say, that the end of life is in a beet row, a spinach field, or a cotton patch. Deprivation and discrimination, these were not abstractions to Lyndon Baines Johnson. He knew that poverty and injustice are as inseparable as opportunity and justice are joined. So that was in him from an early age. Now, like any of us, he was not a perfect man. His experiences in rural Texas may have stretched his moral imagination, but he was ambitious, very ambitious. A young man in a hurry to plot his own escape from poverty and to chart his own political career. And in the Jim Crow South, that meant not challenging convention. During his first 20 years in Congress, he opposed every civil rights bill that came up for a vote, once calling the push for federal legislation a farce and a shame. He was chosen as a vice presidential nominee in part because of his affinity with and ability to deliver that Southern white vote. And at the beginning of the Kennedy administration, he shared with President Kennedy a caution towards racial controversy. But marchers kept marching. 4 little girls were killed in a church. Bloody Sunday happened. The winds of change blew. And when the time came, when LBJ stood in the Oval Office, I picture him standing there, taking up the entire door frame, looking out over the South Lawn in a quiet moment, and asked himself what the true purpose of his office was for. What was the end point of his ambitions? He would reach back in his own memory, and he'd remember his own experience with want. And he knew that he had a unique capacity as the most powerful white politician from the South to not merely challenge the convention that had crushed the dreams of so many, but to ultimately dismantle for good the structures of legal segregation. He's the only guy who could do it. And he knew there'd be a cost. Famously saying, Democratic Party may have lost the South for a generation. That's what his presidency was for. That's where he meets his moment. And possessed with an iron will, possessed with those skills that he had honed so many years in Congress, pushed and supported by a movement of those willing to sacrifice everything for their own liberation, President Johnson fought for and argued and horse-traded and bullied and persuaded until ultimately he signed the Civil Rights Act into law. And he didn't stop there. Even though his advisors again told him to wait. Again told him, let the dust settle. Let the country absorb this momentous decision. He shook them off. The meat in the coconut, as President Johnson would put it, was the Voting Rights Act. So he fought for and passed that as well. Immigration reform came shortly after. And then a Fair Housing Act. And then a health care law that opponents described as socialized medicine that would curtail America's freedom, but ultimately freed millions of seniors from the fear that illness could rob them of dignity and security in their golden years, which we now know today as Medicare.